Does this sound familiar? You have a great track idea in your mind, you rush to your computer, but then it takes forever to translate it into your DAW. If that's you, then you could use the help of a template, one of the most underused workflow hacks in music production. So in this video, we're gonna build the perfect FL Studio template together so that you can spend less time typing and more time creating. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button to help the channel out. And with that out of the way now, let's get into it. So what is an FL Studio template? This is the default FL Studio template that you get when you open up FL Studio for the first time. You have your kick, clap, hat and snare in the channel rack, which I believe they have since one of the earliest versions of FL Studio. On the master, you have a 3D limiter loaded up, and that's about it. You don't have any names on the mixer, you don't have any names in your playlist, you don't have anything else loaded up. This is the default template. And if we're quite honest, this is not the most inspiring view when you open up your DAW. So what is a template? A template is basically a default state for FL Studio when you open it up. You could, for example, have your insert one named to drums and colored in green. And you could have your BPM set to 160. And you could save this as a template so that whenever you load up FL Studio, you immediately have this mixer track named as drums, and you immediately have your BPM set to 160. But that would be a very basic template, but that's the general concept, is to set up your session in FL Studio with mixer tracks, with plugins, with even synths and full beats if you want to. The whole goal is to make your workflow a lot more seamless and easy when you open up FL Studio. So the first thing you should think about when creating an FL Studio template is, what is the purpose of my template? So we often think about a template as just one unique thing that you're going to load up. So a master template that you're always going to use when you open up FL Studio. But in reality, you can create as many templates as you want to fit different types of purposes. So one thing you can think about is templates by genre. So let me show you very quickly with another template here that I have opened up. So this right here, for example, is my drum and bass template. It's got its BPM set to 174, which is standard in drum and bass. And the whole project is set up to fit drum and bass specifically. So different kick layers, break layers, which you always use in drum and bass. A lot of bass chops, for example, that you might use for transitions. If you produce house, for example, your BPM might be set to 115 or 120, and your mixer track might look completely different, probably a lot simpler for the drums, for example. Another approach you can take when creating a template is thinking about the type of work you're going to be doing in FL Studio. So for example, here, this is my mastering template. And you can see it's a lot simpler. I've not named a lot of mixer tracks or anything in the playlist. I simply have one mixer track here for the track I'm gonna master. I have one here for the reference track. And then on the actual master track, I have several EQ plugins which are set to different frequency bands. I have just the low end here. I have a band here between 100 and 500 hertz. I have just the top end over here. And so this allows me to isolate specific frequencies and then compare the track I'm mastering by soloing it and the reference track. So this is a completely different type of template tailored towards mastering, but it allows me to save a lot of time loading up different plugins and setting the frequency ranges, etc. However, most of the time you'll probably want a template to start sketching IDs and create a track. So let's just go back to a totally empty template. So let's imagine we're a techno producer and we want to create a template to speed up our workflow when producing techno. So first thing we're gonna do is set our BPM. So let's set it a bit slower. Let's set it around 135. Next, I'm gonna open up our audio settings, check our buffer length. So right now I have it to 1024, which is good if I'm not gonna do too much live recording. So that's gonna work for me. I'm gonna check that my MIDI is properly enabled. Next up, what I love to do in my templates is set up time markers. So in FL Studio, you can just press Ctrl and T, and this will create a brand new time marker. Right click, rename. We're gonna call this intro. Let's say intro 1. Let's have a second intro here which will also be 16 bars. Then let's have a pre-drop here, which will be 8 bars. And then our main drop here, which will also be 16 bars. So by setting these time markers, you'll already have a clear idea of how to structure your track. If you prefer, you can also create dummy clips. Dummy clips are simply empty MIDI clips that you rename and color. So if you're more of a visual person, you can call this one intro, for example. I'm gonna color it in yellow. Gonna make this one unique and call it intro 2. Pre-drop here, and let's say our drop elements are gonna be in blue. Actually, we can't really read that, so let me switch that to light green, and then we would have our actual drop right here. So you can just collapse this, and this gives you a bit more of a visual view of your time markers. So once you've set up your time markers, it's time to work on the playlist and mixer tracks. So in our mixer tracks right now, we don't have anything. So let's start at the beginning and rename some of these mixer tracks. So I'm gonna color all my drum tracks in green. Call this one kick, kick 2, then probably a snare, a second snare. By the way, I'm using shift click to directly rename and color a track. And then let's add a few hats channels. Next, I'm just gonna right click here and set a separator. And let's move on to our bass elements. Probably a sub. Let's also set a rumble and maybe a second rumble if we want a variation. Let's also add a track for mid bass. And now let's add a few tracks for synths. If you want to do this really quickly, you can just hold Control, select any number of tracks, right click, rename. I'm gonna call these synths and color them in yellow, enter, enter. And now you have everything colored in yellow and named synths. I'm gonna add a separator again over here. And let's do exactly the same thing with some effects. Control hold, drag over, right click, rename, call this effects, and let's color this in blue. Perfect. The next thing I like to do is to replicate this structure into my playlist. Probably gonna speed this up so I don't bore you too much. Likewise, if you want to rename a bunch of playlist tracks all at once, just hold Control, drag over, right click, rename. This is probably a bit too bright for me, but you can choose whatever colors you want. Next thing I'm going to do is group these tracks in the playlist. First, I'm going to go over kick and insert one, call this drums. You can set the same color if you want or not. Then I'm simply going to select everything right here under the drums track, right click, group with above. And now all these tracks are grouped together, and this enables me to quickly access all of my drum tracks. I'm gonna do the same here with the bass, so just above sub. Perfect. So now our FL Studio template is really starting to take shape. Hopefully you're following along and adjusting this template to fit your specific needs. Next up, let's talk about plugins. Now this is a bit of a controversial topic. Some people will tell you to never preload plugins in your project. I think it's quite a handy tool because some plugins you're always going to be using on the same elements. So what am I talking about? Let's say for my main kick, I'm always going to be using an EQ, boosting the fundamental. So if you find yourself always loading the same plugins on the same mixer tracks, why not just integrate them into your template? So right here, I've loaded a Pro Q3 on my kick. I could leave it like this. What I could do if I want to go one step further is to actually adjust this EQ. So let's say I always high cut roughly around 20 Hertz, for example. I could set it around here. And let's say I know I'm going to boost the fundamental frequency. Now, I don't know what the fundamental frequency of my project is going to be, but I can already create this type of bell curve. So this way my EQ is loaded and ready, and I can simply turn it on when I'm ready to process my kick. So this way I have a bunch of plugins that are ready to be used, and I can simply turn them on one by one when I'm ready to process my kick. Another thing I like to load up on my master track is a mono switch. So this is a free plugin that you can grab called A1 Stereo Control. And what I would do here is simply hit the mono switch. I'm going to rename the plugin to mono. And this way, when I'm doing my mix down, I can simply turn this on and off, and I can check if my mix sounds good in mono as well. So again, these are all baby steps that might not seem like a lot, but it's these 1% improvements that are really going to speed up your workflow. Next up, let's stay on the mixer track. What you're probably always gonna do is create bus and sends and grouping tracks together. What I can do here is create my drums bus. I'm gonna use the same color, and here you can simply hold Alt and then left arrow, and I'm simply gonna move it over all the way to the left. Next up, I'm gonna select all of my drum elements like this, right click under my drum bus over here, route to this track only. And now I have all of my drum elements routed into one mixer track. Same thing as we did with the kick. I could already load up some plugins. So for example, some EQ, compression, saturation, whatever you typically put on your drum bus, you can already load it up right here. In the same vein, I always have a drums room. So the reverb that's applied on the drums. Right click under drums room and sidechain to this track. And then in my drum bus, towards the end probably, load up a fruity send, right click drums room, and now I'm sending a copy to this drums room. If I want to go one step further in the drums room, I can already load up my favorite reverb and set it to 100% wet. Probably gonna load up an EQ as well. Probably gonna set this to a low cut right here and also a high cut. Perfect, maybe something like this. And turn this down. Perfect. Now I already have my drums room set up just the way I like. And you could do the exact same thing if you always use compression in parallel, for example. What you can also do is setting up your send tracks. So typically this would be reverb and delay, but what I usually do is set them all the way to the end. So let's say around here, I'm going to rename this one to reverb, color it in orange, and delay. Gonna load up a reverb here, set it already to 100% wet because this is a send channel. And then in delay, I'm gonna load up my favorite delay at the moment, which is Echo Boy. Perfect, now I have two send tracks here. And now any synth sound or any effect sound that I wanna process with reverb or delay, I can simply load up two different fruity sends. I'm gonna rename these for clarity, so reverb for this one, delay for this one, sidechain to both tracks, and then select the appropriate one here. So this one is my reverb, and this one is delay. Perfect, now I have this effects track right here, which has reverb and delay applied to it. The great thing about this is that you can instantly apply reverb and delay to any element, and it's always gonna be the same reverb and delay, which is going to give a lot of cohesion to your track. Finally, one last trick you can use if you want to bring your template to the next level is create inspiration starting points. What I mean by inspiration is an instrument or a beat or something that's going to inspire you immediately to create music. So for example, you could load up your favorite synth, and that way when you open up FL Studio, you already have your synth and you can start playing right away. Or if you wanted, you could even load up a beat to get you started. Let's find a closed head as well. Route this one right here. Let me add a tiny bit of movement to those heads. Let's throw in a perk loop as well. Perfect. So this could be one example of a starting point. When you open up FL Studio, you immediately have this beat waiting for you and you can start working on more melodic elements. Now you don't want to go overboard with this either. When you're designing your own template, it can be tempting to start loading up plugins on every mixer track and loading up different sounds and synths. But you have to keep in mind that the goal of a template is to speed up your workflow. So anything that is manual, like naming tracks, coloring tracks, grouping tracks, etc., but you don't want to stifle your creativity. The more things you put into your template, the less creative you're going to be. If you start putting EQs, compressors, saturators, whatever on every mixer track, that's really going to constrain your creativity because you're going to be doing the exact same processing on every single track you do. Finally, once you're happy with your template, you can simply click on File, Save As, and save your template as a project. Create a folder named Templates, for example, where you save all of your different templates. What you can also do is save it in FL Studio default templates folder. And if you save your project there, it's going to appear when you go to New from Template. You have FL Studio default templates here, and then you're going to have your own templates that appear right here. That's it for this guide on FL Studio templates. I hope you found it useful and that you'll now be able to create your very own templates. Let me know in the comments down below what you like to include in your templates. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.